it's on you. Like, it's not, again, a lot of people believe it's on somebody else or a previous generation or something else. It's like, no, the good news is that it's on you. And if you save $3 a day for a long period of time, you'll have more than $1 million. But the bad news is, especially if you're further along in your life and you haven't saved very much, the bad news is that it's also on you.
All right, before we really like dive in, I think like we need to address the elephant in the room. You need to tell us about this belt you're wearing.
Yes.
What is this bling?
Yes, this is the Barbarian Games belt.
Can you see that? Stand up for a second and look into that camera right there.
Yeah, so, we won this in June, so a couple months ago.
That was powerful.
Part of the reason I'm here with this on is to encourage men to sign up for next year. I'm not that intimidating. There's 4 other guys that are in better shape than me in our tribe. So, I think next year we're hoping more guys sign up, and knowing all the memory verses is part of this Barbarian Games, and I think that's the part where we're trying to call as many men as possible to try to come out and compete. Think about it more like a 5K. You don't sign up for a 5K thinking you're going to win per se, but that goal of getting in better shape and learning all the memory verses is kind of the idea around it. And so, you don't want my partner in here because he's a beast. So if he wears it, everyone's like, oh, I can't compete. Like, you can compete with me. Don't worry. Like, there's a lot of guys who can be.
You guys were the brains and the brawn.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. And so a little bit about this. So the Barbarian Games, this was our first year doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing.
It was awesome.
But next year's going to be even better.
I'm training, and I think a lot of us need this goal to kind of, okay, let me go after this. So
Shadow started training.
I did.
Yeah.
I've lost like 15 pounds.
That's awesome, dude.
I'll probably gain it all back before the next
No, don't say that, man. You're gonna take the belt from him.
Yeah, come after the belt. That's what I would encourage men. Come keep my belt.
I would say like the biggest thing that just blew me away watching the Barbarian Games was we do beast workouts all the time in MA, but the thing that blew me away was the Bible verses.
Yeah.
Like you had to know all 12 verses and it's a random order and you'd be in the middle of like,
people are screaming everywhere,
bear crawling with hammers. And then one of the judges is like, what's Ephesians 2:8-9? And
for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. As fast as you can.
That's why you won there.
Exactly.
It is like people are standing there thinking about it for a minute, like, oh, what's that one? And then, those are precious seconds.
Yeah, we only won by less than 30 seconds.
Really?
Yeah, and the second place team from Pennsylvania, we chatted with them afterwards, and they were having a hard time. They weren't even coined, and they knew the memory verses, but they didn't have it as tight.
Dang.
And so they would have won, no question, if they had known them better.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like for 2025, guys, like learn your verses.
Yeah.
It's going to be a blast. We haven't really talked about this, but let's go ahead and pull the pull the veil off a little bit.
Are you introducing it?
We're going to do next year, we're going to do Men's Alliance National Rally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we realized like at Barbarian Games, like, man, people are coming in from multiple states.
Yeah.
People are traveling for this thing from all over the country. We need to do more with them while they're all here.
Yeah.
Like, let's make this thing huge. So that's why next year we're going National Rally. We're going to have the Barbarian Games. We want to get all of our tribesmen from every state here, and it's going to be absolutely epic.
Yeah.
I think Ranger is supposed to get our workout released sometime around the beginning of the year, so there'll be a little bit more time, know. And so again, kind of like a normal race where you don't sign up for a race and not know if it's a marathon or a 5K. It's kind of helpful to know what you're getting into, and we really didn't know. We had like 2 weeks, maybe a few weeks, and that was it.
It's always good to be the first team to win something the first year that it's going on.
Yeah.
It's always going to get harder.
Right now. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to happen again.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we're hoping that, we get some guys from Texas and Oregon and Alabama and maybe hopefully Alaska and Budapest. We want guys coming from all over to compete for this thing. And what sets us apart is from like something like a Spartan race or a Tough Mudder or something is the scripture memorization component. Like we've only got 12 verses in MA. It's only 12. Learn these 12.
Yep. And to me, it was a big difference because I kind of fell into this trap for many years thinking this was a kid's thing to memorize scripture. Oh, they're young, they got the brains that can absorb information.
Yeah.
You know, my kids at Veritas, they're memorizing all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's great. It's moving to hear them do it. But I didn't think that was for me. And so going through this process really pushed me. And now I'm like, yeah, of course I can memorize scripture, and I should.
Yeah.
Now I'm listening to sermons and all sorts of things, and I can hear those verses coming up over and over. I know that verse. And I think it's just, it's compelling to have the word on our hearts. When Jesus was in the desert at the beginning of his ministry,
right.
He used scripture to defend against the devil every time.
Yeah.
And so I guess in the barbarian games, it's exactly like that. I mean, you are under duress. You can barely, say anything. You can barely catch your breath. And then to be having that scripture so well to produce it at that point is the goal, So
that's such a great point.
Yeah.
Right. Like Jesus knew scripture and quoted it.
Yeah.
When he was going through hard times, why would we think that we should be held to any different standard, right?
Yeah.
Why would we think that scripture memorization is for kids when it's what Jesus did? So I love how Men's Alliance is kind of out there taking back Bible verse memorization. We're reclaiming it for adults.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so helpful. I think when you're praying, you can bring it up. You just see it coming over and over. And it's, if you're really memorizing it, you have to put it on your heart and mind all the time, as you should be doing anyways. But it's just it's for me, at least, having this goal and having something as a target to go towards is really helpful.
That's awesome. All right. So you've been on the podcast before, but It was before we were in video.
Yeah.
So you were on the audio podcast. I'm sure you guys are going to want to go check that out. That was our first real podcast dedicated to talking about finances.
Yeah.
Which obviously we need to continue to do a lot more of for many reasons. Jesus talked a lot about money.
Yeah.
And also, money is the number one cause of divorce. Finances is one, sex is two. And so as men, I think there's so many good, compelling reasons like that, that we've got to be talking about it and being wise with it. So it's good to have you back on for kind of like, I don't know what we're going to call this, like finances 2.0 or whatever.
We'll figure it out after you see the podcast.
That's right. We'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
I know that as you and I were talking about this, and I know you've got all kinds of stuff you're prepared to talk about, but I'm just going to just push us into the deep end.
Yeah.
One of the things that you're very, I'll just say, smart on is there's this big conversation going on in the country about a gender pay gap.
Oh yeah.
And you hear this everywhere, and I've heard lots of smart people talk about it, and it's still kind of confusing. Like, do women really get paid less than men in this country, Doc? Tell us about this. What's going on?
Yes and no. So that's why it's confusing,
Yeah.
right? So the Democrat Party platform, for instance, this is one of their big things they cite.
Right.
Women make 82 cents on the dollar for men. What it doesn't tell you is that they're actually doing the same work. And so that's the critical difference, because it's kind of assumed that you would only compare the same situation, the same job. The same
when you
hours.
say that, they're right. There is that assumption.
Yeah. And so that 82 cents on the dollar does not include the same situation. And when you include the same situation, there's no difference in work.
Okay.
So that was the big point that Jordan Peterson made. People can look up his interview with Channel 4 News, Kathy Newman, 2018, 50 million views or whatever it is on YouTube. And he's really giving all the evidence and saying, look, you're not comparing the same situation. She kept kind of trying to put words in his mouth, talk about hyper successful men. Hey, look at all these guys in government, that are in charge of companies. Men must be doing better. And his was like, no, not when you compare the same situation. Men are more prevalent in certain professions and not in others. And I think generally, the answer is that they make the same amount of money in the same situation. There was a good study done for my industry, financial advisors, and it was published in 2020, and it found that there was 40% gap. So not 18 cents, but 40% in our industry. And so of course everyone's saying, "Oh my goodness, the finance industry has this horrible, sexism going on." But they compared tens of thousands of people, same situation, 1% gap. So 1% difference between men and women. So virtually none.
So
and women made $200K a year also, by the way. So
I want to see if I'm understanding this. Correct me if I'm wrong here. So you're saying like it was all within the same industry.
Yeah.
But different jobs within that industry. So it's comparing maybe somebody who's like a first year financial advisor, female, with somebody who's been doing it for 40 years and they're the CEO of their own financial advising firm. And if that's a man, he's going to be, you would expect that position to be making a ton more, but it's saying in that situation, the woman is making less than a man, but it's not taking into account, if what I'm hearing you is right, it's not taking into account one's a CEO and one's a first year.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So in my opinion, it's like malpractice to show you the differences without the same situation. But it's rampant in almost every category that you can think of. And I think that part of, I've been writing this book for more than a year more aggressively, but that's the main story of the book is, hey, there's all these situations where it's like this. People I assumed that the data that was presented to us was comparing the same situation. You can't compare different situations and then try to say it's about gender. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. So even if you did, like, I'm just thinking of an example, even if you did a study of pay for public school teachers.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, some people teach chemistry for 20 years and some people teach, I'm just going to pick on Sandman here and say PE for 1 year. Right. So you would expect there to probably be a pay difference and not just say this teacher makes so much more than this teacher. Like what subject, how many years have they been doing it? How many classes do they teach? Like all this stuff. So what I'm hearing from like you and Peterson is all things being equal. Like if you compare a female PE teacher with the same years of experience in the same county to a male PE teacher with the same years of experience in the same county, there's no difference.
And many of them. So I think part of our immediate reaction is to think about a specific situation that either confirms or denies that. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I know someone who's not getting paid somebody
anecdotal.
Else. Exactly. And we all learn from stories. So the stories are important, they're helpful, but that's how we're being manipulated. They'll give us one example that is not actually true for the whole group and say, oh, look at this woman who's getting discriminated. It's like, okay, that's not good, but that doesn't mean that everyone is in that same category.
Right. And when all this really came out and was such a huge national conversation, I was working for the DOD.
Yeah.
And I found it very head scratching because I'm like, everybody's making the exact same here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually the director of our agency, a 3-star Air Force general, the director of the agency was a female.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember thinking like, an 05 in the military makes the same thing as every other 05 in the military. Right. There's no gender pay difference. Now, of course, that's true for every government job. Where
it's
against
the law to pay people different because, and that's been true for 50 years.
Yeah.
So like people are saying, oh, we're going to change this. It's like, no, you don't, it's already law. Like you can't do that actually.
Yeah.
You can't pay people different.
And so I think
because of their gender.
Peterson goes into women go to jobs that are more, like in the arts or in education, and more men are going for engineering, law.
That's right.
Just different careers. So you're comparing a bunch of people that maybe teach kindergarten to a bunch of people that are electrical engineers.
This may be a little bit controversial, but men and women are different. So they actually are different. And I think the media really likes to look at areas where women are not doing as well, but they will ignore areas where men are not doing as well. And Peterson kept pushing that and saying, look, like for instance, 93% of people in jail are men. Okay, so
do you want equality there?
Exactly. So if you look from 2015, the Washington Post started looking at police shootings, for instance, and 4.5% of the shootings since then till now are women. So men are 22 times as likely to be killed by the cops. So you could make a headline that says 22-time more likely to be killed by cops if you're a man versus a woman. And if you want equal outcome, you'd have to pull over every woman that you see and try to arrest them and, engage them in such a way to try to get anywhere near equal outcome.
Wow.
So there's higher risk taking for men.
Right.
And that results in better business success on entrepreneurship at times on average, because they're willing to take more risk. We basically are taking risk in either direction. It's either really bad or it's really good. And that's just true on average. It doesn't mean that every man is more entrepreneurial or that every man's going to jail or anything like that.
Right.
But we wouldn't compare those same two and then say we live in a matriarchy, because look at how sexist the cops are. But that's what we're doing with the wage information. And we're trying to push it like the women are being discriminated against, and there's no evidence for that.
So in my opinion here, the real thing that's going on, the behind the curtain thing that's happening, is this is just another attempt to divide people.
100%.
Right. It's like they're trying to, stir up malcontent, stir up animosity by making people feel like they're being cheated.
Yep.
Right. Making women in this case feel like they're being gypped. And, women that, might not understand the nuances of the data that's being presented are rightly going to get fired up.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to be like, hey, this seems like it's unfair.
Yep.
And I'm going to stand up and fight for this. So they're playing right into their hands.
Yeah.
They're doing exactly what they want to. And really, we're in this world right now where we're being divided up every which way possible.
Yeah.
Men versus women, black versus white, Republican versus Democrat. Everybody's trying to keep us fighting as much as we can with each other.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it's a Marxist agenda. And I think as Christians, we fight that. We say, no, we are Christians. We are one, under Christ. And I think that's actually the answer to a lot of the problems. But part of me is just trying to help people be aware of the truth. And that's hard to do because it's confusing. Like you said, and love and truth together is a hard combination to do.
Yeah, man, that's so true. So we just dispelled that. You just dispelled that one. Here's the other one that I wanted to ask you about. What about a race pay gap? Is there a race pay gap in this country?
So there's not. Again, same sort of situation. And this was probably the crazy thing that I found. It was even just last year that I found this data. And I'll ask you a question. When a white person dies, how much money do you think they receive as an inheritance on average? What the average number is?
Oh my gosh.
Any clue?
I am like so out of my element there.
Yeah.
How much do they inherit?
Yes.
From like their family that dies?
Yeah. If they
average?
Yeah. It technically median, so middle.
Okay. Yeah. Man, this is going to be just a super uneducated guess. I'm going to guess 100,000.
That's a pretty good guess. It's right around 90.
Oh, wow. Whew.
And so
I didn't embarrass myself too bad.
Yeah, I was going to say like 10 grand.
I won't make you guess on the other one.
We come from different places.
For Black Americans, it's the exact same amount.
Really?
Yes, which is completely insane. People don't know that. So
the average amount,
the median inheritance,
the median amount that a Black person inherits
is right around $90,000.
About the exact same.
About the exact same. So the reason that matters is that most people that talk about differences in race will quote wealth differences as reasons for discrimination either in the past or right now. And the reason that doesn't make sense is because it is very rare for anyone to have any sort of money right now that they inherited. So that's something that people don't realize. And again, for division purposes, that story that most people actually believe that the primary way that you become a millionaire is by inheriting the money.
Really? That's
what they believe. Yeah, that's what the polls say. So, it's 2/3 of millennials, half of baby boomers believe that. And only 3% of millionaires have inherited that money.
Really?
So it's a massive
3%.
3%.
97% of millionaires
or more
today in America, or billionaires,
are self-made.
Millionaires plus, yeah.
Yeah. Are self-made, or they built this.
It's right. Yeah, they didn't inherit it.
Wow.
And a lot of people, the next question they'll say, or the next retort will be, what about the richest people, the billionaires?
Yeah.
And Forbes 400 does an analysis on this. You can look up. 80% of them are not there because of inheritance. So it's not quite as high as 97, but it's still very high.
Yeah.
And that number has increased. So 50 years ago it was only 50%. So the American dream and building wealth, is even more rampant now than it was before.
So are you saying that the American dream is coming true more often?
Yeah, certainly in the Forbes, the top folks, for sure. And I think there's a lot of evidence that it does in general. And so again, a lot of the people that try to drive a narrative that say the American dream is dead, they will look at not the same situation, okay, and look at different generations and say, look, millennials have less money. But again, millennials are much less likely to be married. And they're almost always comparing families, because that's the data that we have. And so the millennials have lower marriage rates, which means you have less money. It's not that complicated. You have less people in your house, in your home. So the same sort of idea of this gender situation is happening among different groups of people, trying to rise up and divide and say, young people, hey, you can't make it. We need to take from the people that have it in order to make things fair and right. And that's just not actually true. Studies have shown that even millionaires, as their kids inherit the money, 70% of those inheritances are gone within that next generation, and 90% are gone within 2 generations.
Wow.
So it helps to support the other evidence that nobody that has money inherited it, because the people that do inherit it, they just blow it.
Right.
On almost in every case.
Where you get all these statistics from?
So there's lots of data, and we can try to link some of the stats that they can do it. Certainly it'll be in the book, all the evidence. I think part of what's taken a while for me to sift through this is to try to find it. If you Google things, you won't always have it.
Yeah.
So the craziest study that people can look up on race specifically is a study called Exploring the Racial Wealth Gap. Okay, so the Federal Reserve has got the best studies on wealth that's out there, and it's the most quoted. And every 3 years they survey about 5,000 families, and they've been doing that for decades. Okay, and so again, people will take that survey data that is not comparing the same situation and send it out. And so the ones from a few years ago showed a 10 times wealth gap for white families versus black families. But they didn't tell you that the white families were 10 years older on average, and they were married versus unmarried. So you're comparing these very different groups.
Yeah.
And then people assume that it has to do because of their race.
Yeah, you take a white guy that's 39 and married and compare him to a black guy that's 29 and single. There's going to be a lot of differences there,
for sure.
But those differences have probably nothing to do with their skin color.
Exactly. And a lot of people, if they hear that, they'll say, well, maybe white people are older because of racism in some other way. And there's not good evidence for that, because white Americans live 3 years longer on average, but Hispanic Americans live 3 years longer than white Americans. And Asian Americans live 7 years longer than white Americans. So it's not like a doctor's in there like, oh, hey, I'm not going to give you medicine because you're white. Only if you're Hispanic or Asian am I going to give you the medicine. So there's there's not good evidence for that line of thinking, that it has to do with lifespan and marriage rates. There's lower marriage rates in the black community than the white community. But that wasn't always the case. If you look at history from like 1860 up to 1960, the rates were almost identical. So there was a change in the 60s, and there's a bigger difference now. But the reason that the studies amplify the differences is because they're looking at a median number. So just one family in the middle versus one family in the middle, and it's married and unmarried. So they're not having any nuance. It's just a big difference that they're showing. So that's part of the data that's out there.
Man, that's so important to know.
Yeah.
That's incredible just to hear it explained.
Yeah. And I think that's just anytime you hear information about it, it's very likely not adjusted for the same situation. So just be aware of that. I think that's the main story, is that when you compare the same situation, there's very little difference. And I think that you can take that narrative in different directions. So that study exploring the racial wealth gap found no difference in wealth between different groups. So they went back 24 years over all these studies. They compared the same situation, no difference in wealth, which is completely crazy, because part of the division in the narrative is that if you look a certain way, you can't get ahead. And that hasn't been true for decades. I mean, this was going back into the 80s.
Wow.
So I think you can take that in different directions. I think part of it is, it doesn't mean that there's not discrimination. It just means that however much discrimination there is, they're overcoming it.
It's not saying the world's perfect.
No, absolutely not. But you can't use unadjusted data differences to prove discrimination, because those aren't even the same scenario that you're looking at.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. So I think that was the most shocking thing to me, and that encouraged me to look into it more. And that's kind of what I've been doing for a few years.
Man, that's That's incredible. So you're working on a book.
Yes.
Tell us a little about that. And what aspects of it are you most passionate about?
This is one of the main points that I make in the book. And then I try to talk about how don't look at anecdotes. People are going to immediately think about a situation where a black or white person is doing better or worse. And so I share a number of stories, and one of the stories I share to kind of, hey, fight that narrative is my sister, she died from suicide. What's interesting is like we rescheduled this for a few months. Today is the day that she died 11 years ago.
Really?
Almost exactly this hour. Okay. And so that's a little bit intense, but cool that I'm able to honor her today. And she died from suicide. And so my natural reaction can be, oh man, we need to stop women from dying from suicide. But men are 80% of suicide.
Right.
So they're 4 times as likely to die. So even though I had that personal experience, doesn't mean that's common for other people. And the way that she died was relatively unique too. And I didn't know this at the time. And I will share a little bit, which I know I'll just give disclosure in case people are nervous about hearing about a specific way. But in the morning on this day 11 years ago, she went to a shooting range to learn how to shoot a gun. And then she came back in the afternoon and rented a gun again and shot herself on the spot. Wow. She didn't die on location. They transported her and she died on transport to the hospital. And so my immediate reaction was all sorts of sadness and anger and all the things that happens from suicide. But was, man, why? How could they let that happen?
Right.
We should change the laws. And so I looked it up, and it's very, very rare. So I could spend all this time and energy trying to fight, shooting ranges from letting people shoot guns, or actually fight the underlying reason that she killed herself, which had nothing to do with the guns.
Yeah.
So I think that was helpful for me to understand, even personally, separating what happened to me from what is happening in the bigger picture, and then focusing your energy on what's actually a normal problem versus what happened to me specifically.
Yeah, but man, that requires a lot of rational thinking and objectivity, which is really hard to have when you're emotionally connected, whether it be, you're emotionally involved. If you're a woman that's not making a lot of money, this is an easy thing to point your finger at and say it's because of the men. Or if you're black and you're not making a lot of money, it's easy to point your finger and say it's because of, a white person. And in your situation, you lose a sister to firearm suicide. There's a lot of different things you could point your finger at, but it requires a tremendous amount of detachment to say, let me look at this objectively. How common is this? Is this a problem that needs to be addressed in our country? Are people renting firearms out to people with, mental health issues regularly? So I think that what you did there was overcoming a lot of personal emotion and biases in order to look at that.
Yeah, and I think that's just how God made my brain to operate. So I would really take a lot of credit for that. But I will share a little story because, again, God was so instrumental in my in me just turning to Him during that moment. And since then was a really critical time of just surrendering to God. I mean, that song "Surrender" by Hillsong, I just sung that many times with my wife and just cried my eyes out. But after a couple of days, He gave me this incredible hope. I mean, she was reading a book called To Heaven and Back, which I know you've had some near-death experience folks on here. And there's a movie, I think it's called Near Death on Amazon Prime. That she's in, one of the people interviewed in there. But there's a lot of hope around, she had a lot of hope when she was killing herself, actually, which is, an interesting dynamic there. And I think reading her journals, seeing her pray, just pouring her heart out to God is encouraging even through a loss like that. And so I think that was helpful. But part of what God calls us to do is love others. And so, I called the shooting range a couple of days later after God had kind of shifted my heart to tell them that I'm sorry about what happened to their place. Cause I can just imagine, that someone doing that and how tough that would be. And when I called and I talked to the manager, and he was like, he said something like, I thought something was wrong with her. And my immediate reaction was like, well, then why didn't you do something? But I didn't take the bait. I just went and said, hey, I'm really sorry about this happened to your place. And, again, I can't make that sort of a shift in my heart. Only God can do that. So, to be able to ridiculous, forgiveness and acting that way is not my nature for sure. So,
wow. It's powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that this was that anniversary.
I know.
As we rescheduled this podcast a couple of times.
Becky Love right there.
She's for a reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was an incredible person. We were really close. We were the type of relationship where you just talk for hours and everything, time would just go by so quickly. And part of what was challenging about her loss is that she didn't know that I fought depression and suicide in 2 different seasons when I was 9 and then again as an young adult. And we talked about depression, but we didn't talk about that. And I know from later on being certified in suicide intervention training is that you really need to talk about it with people who are fighting depression. And so I wish we had. I don't know it would have saved her, but I know I would have had a better chance because we would have been able to talk about it. She would have been able to just dialogue and get some of the stuff off her chest. She didn't tell any family members. And that's really normal. A lot of people don't tell the closest people to them because there's a much higher risk that you're going to be rejected and shamed and you're bad and not want to be, people want to be continuing to be with you and love you. So there's a big risk to share it. But yeah, I would just encourage men, if you think someone is having a hard time, look into, what are the preconditions for suicide? How does depression work? And just try to encourage them to speak up. Usually one-on-one is great. And I know you did some great podcasts about this already, but just wanted to share that too.
It's such an important topic.
Yeah.
And it's such a misunderstood topic.
Yeah.
And, when I think about Doc Love and the things that you speak passionately about, 2 things come to my mind.
Yeah.
You speak very passionately, and I know you're very involved in nonprofits and stuff about death.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about death and money.
Yeah.
Right. And those are 2 big things that sometimes go hand in hand. Is
death and taxes.
Right.
Yeah, I try to help people with taxes. Try to pay as
2 guarantees
little as you can. You got to pay to Caesar what is Caesar, but don't pay more. But yeah, I'm involved with Comfort Zone Camp. In 2 weeks, I'll be going to camp on my birthday
cool.
In memory of my sister. There'll be a camp out in Palmyra, Virginia. And again, part of our Men's Alliance is remembering the dead and remembering that you're going to go there and how are you going to really live?
Yeah.
And it's hard to really immerse yourself in that, in my opinion, with just reading news about challenging situations or even a podcast like this. If you go to the camp and you're in there and you're hearing from these kids, it will change you. It will change your world. You will go and hug your kids better. You will go and appreciate what you have better. Your heart will not be worried about division and not having as much as somebody else. It'll just be gratitude because life is shorter than you think. You don't know when you're going to be gone. And the other thing I'll tell you from going to over 20 camps now is that, the kids talk about their favorite things being these little idiosyncrasies, and these little small things that you do with your kids are so critical and they love that. And so keep doing those, keep spending time with your kids. And I would encourage you to come to camp because it basically changes my heart for like at least 6 months.
Wow.
Where I am now, it's called Comfort Zone Camp. They're headquartered in Richmond. It's national. They're 25-year history. All sorts of different, some of them are specific suicide loss camps or other types of losses. Usually there's about 70 kids. Each kid is paired with a big buddy. So you're with them for 48 hours. You're in about 10 hours of group therapy. Counselors that go through this, they see more change in these kids in 2 days than a year worth of therapy because it's so immersive and fun. And you're not just talking about the hard things. You're going after the hard things, but you're also talking about what was your favorite memory? What were some of the things that you love to do with your loved one and trying to help them have a more full relationship with that person who's passed versus just thinking about the trauma and the challenge of the death.
So these are all kids who experienced a death in their family.
Yep.
Is it specifically a parent or is it sometimes a sibling?
Anybody in the immediate family. It can be a caregiver too. So just, anybody that's in the.
So a great resource if you know a child, who's lost somebody in their family.
Absolutely free.
Fantastic.
So there's no cost to it.
Wow.
Volunteers, again, most of the people are volunteers that are there. And it's a powerful statement to those kids. They're like, wait, you're not paid to be here. You're here for a weekend. Like for no, why are you here? So it's a powerful story. To me, it's, as a Christian, it's living out this, second commandment, which is to love your neighbor really well. And in a really immersive way. You don't have your phone with you. So you're really immersed in this. experience, and it'll change you for sure.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I've written in our war cry about it, and recorded a mission brief about it. It's been really on my heart heavy is, and this is like an old cliche of a question you and I have talked about before, but if you were on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
Yeah.
And, been really, thinking about, the book of James and what he talks about bearing fruit.
Yep.
And what what Jesus says in the book of Matthew about, branches that don't produce fruit are cut off and thrown in the fire.
Those are harder verses.
they're the scariest verses in the Bible.
I think the scariest verse is you calling me Lord, but then, I said I didn't know you and you're out.
Yeah,
and
it's depart from me, I never knew you.
Yeah, doing miracles in my name.
Yeah.
So even the evidence.
Cast out demons
exactly.
We cast out demons in your name. And he's like, depart from me, I never knew you.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes when we talk about producing fruit and what evidence is there that you're a follower of Jesus, could you even be convicted in court of being a follower of Jesus? We sometimes think about big, enormous things. Well, I don't know if there's any evidence. I'm not a missionary or whatever, but I think to your point, it is the small things. Hey, men, has money gotten in the way of how God can use you? Let me tell you about Tom Love, certified financial planner with the Main Street Group. Tom Love from Tuckahoe Tribe, a.k.a. Doc, can absolutely get you squared away with your finances. My wife and I use Doc to handle our personal finances, and his team is second to none. Tom is a certified financial planner. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He's been ranked top 40 under 40. He's been ranked number 2 in Richmond Times-Dispatch. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal. And make sure you mention Men's Alliance whenever you reach out to Doc. He gives Men's Alliance, Tip of the Spear Ministries, a portion of the proceeds when you invest through him. He's a fee-only fiduciary, which means he doesn't make money unless you make money. So check out Tom Love at the Main Street Group. That's where true evidence lies. It's not necessarily when there's a lot of eyes on you.
Yeah.
It's what you do day in, day out, year in, year out.
How are you influencing your family? And I'll just share this a little bit because it's part of the story, which is I was saved at 19 in this incredible way that was unbelievable because I'm stubborn and God had to really hit me with a hammer to help me to realize that he's real. And I shared that with my sister, and that was the turning point for her to be saved. So it was cool to see that little, and I didn't share it with as many people as I knew God wanted me to, but I did share it with some people. And for some people that made a difference. And so that was that I'm grateful for that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. So I want to ask you, what is one of your best pieces of advice or best lessons that you've learned that you know about that you see so many men don't know about finances? What's something where you see there's a big gap where you're like, man, if I could just tell every Christian husband and father this thing about money?
Kind of going back to the point we made earlier, it's encouraging. It's also challenging, which is that it's on you. Like, it's not, again, a lot of people believe it's on somebody else or a previous generation or something else. It's like, no, the good news is that it's on you. And if you save $3 a day for a long period of time, you'll have more than $1 million. But the bad news is, especially if you're further along in your life and you haven't saved very much, the bad news is that it's also on you. And so I think people can kind of overwhelm with that. And, trying to balance that grace and truth and love and truth and saying, okay, even if you're behind, start now. Start looking at where your heart is around money, because I think that's the key for changing your behavior. Go to Christ and pray and ask him to help you with that. Look at 1 Timothy 6, which talks about how contentment is great gain. That's something you want to teach to your kids, that you want to teach to yourself. Are you purchasing things because it's making you feel better in the short term that you don't really need, and you kind of can realize that later on? And then if you stop purchasing that stuff and you start paying off debt, or if you start investing your money, the amount of money that you will have over the long term is crazy. So over 50 years, the stock market, for instance, will produce anywhere from 120 to 180 times your investment. And so you may not have that
how
much.
many years?
50 years, long time.
Yeah.
Right. So I might live 50 years. Who knows? But if I am doing what God calls us to do in Proverbs 12, which is very hard to do, which is leave an inheritance to your children's children. So 2 generations down, there's no question there's 50 years. And so you definitely have some of your money could, if you're doing well, if you're preparing for the next generations, where it could be around that long for sure. And most people with just their kids, just if you're giving money to your kids, it'll last 50 years. And so I think compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah.
Those who know it, earn it. Those who don't, pay it. So if you're paying on credit cards, you're paying on any type of debt. If you're like, hey, Tom, I can't save anything, invest anything. It's like, okay, pay off your cars, pay off your credit cards. You have to change your spending habits first, your heart first around why you're even doing that. And then you can begin to start this cycle of building up money for the future. And by going to Christ, he is your satisfaction, not this purchase. Remain in him and you're going to produce this fruit. So you're going to be better off with money just by turning your heart to him versus trying to find it in other places like money, like sex, or whatever else that you're trying to do. So that would be, I don't know if that's as practical as you're looking for.
That's fantastically practical.
Yeah.
So what is the guy who, okay, I hear you. I've got just a few dollars and I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to start throwing some monthly money into this pot and start to invest it. But I don't even know where on earth to begin.
Yeah, go to schwab.com, open up a brokerage account is what it's called. That's an individual account. It's outside of retirement. You can invest in something called an index fund, which is the stock market as a whole. SWTSX is a total stock market index. It's got about 4,000 different companies, and you can buy that with $1. There's literally zero fees, very easy. When you've built up some money and you want to invest for the longer term, do a Roth IRA if your income is low enough. If your income is higher, do a backdoor Roth, which is a little bit more complicated, but you can just Google that and figure out what that means. So there's all sorts of different strategies. Dave Ramsey's template is really successful and it works. So I would encourage people to look at that, save $1,000, pay off all your non-mortgage debt as baby step 2. And he talks about baby steps because if you really don't have much going on, it's hard to imagine how you can make any progress. I think the first thing I would say to someone like that is you're not alone. About 40% of households have no money saved. Okay. So I don't think people really grasp how many people that is. Almost half the people that you see have no money. If you're younger, it's much higher. So if you're 35, it's roughly 65% of people have no money. So if you're beating yourself up for whatever reason, just know that it's the way to wealth is over the long term. And so if you save a little bit over time, that's how you become successful. That's why that legacy thing is so important, because if you think it's from somebody else, you may not do anything. You may just sit back.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, you think God is going to do all that. We're not encouraged to make disciples. You may just sit back and you may not do anything. Yeah. So I think, you got to know that you need to be activated in this domain. I would encourage people to try to prepare their kids with this information, knowing that you need to teach them how to interact with money versus giving it to them. You can't just never talk about money because it's faux pas and you don't
teaching them how to interact with money. I like how you worded that.
Yeah. The relationship with money. That's what Jesus is talking about over and over. And if I had to summarize his words, it would be beware. This can become the highest thing. It is likely to become the highest thing. He preached on the danger of money, some estimates 10 to 20 times more than anything else, which is crazy. So I think we all should be thinking about this in a very spiritual way. Oh, hey, I need to be careful with this. This can take over. I may be watching my accounts every day. I may be trying to focus too much on what the money aspect is doing. And now you're distracted. Now the evil one has got you in his little game of taking you over here. And now you're not starting a tribe, or now you're not, sharing the gospel with your family or learning apologetics through the patch class in order to then grow your ability to interact with people and bring them to Christ, bring them home to finish strong, when we pass away, of course.
Yeah. I think the words of Jesus when he says, no man can serve 2 masters. Yeah. You cannot serve both God and I think that when he said that, all of his disciples, everybody standing around thought he was going to say the devil, right? Like, what's the opposite? You can't serve both God and the devil, right? And he says, cannot serve both God and money.
Yeah.
Like those are the two extremes. You're either going to serve God or you're going to serve money.
Yeah.
And that is like a, whoa, what did he just say? Kind of like a paradigm shift of a way to think. But, you know, of course, we know, and we've talked about on this, that God doesn't want your money.
Yeah.
He wants your heart. And he knows that where your money goes, your heart follows. So
how many people preach on what you were saying though? Like you can't serve two masters. They're always, they don't bring up the money part. They're thought like you can't do bad things and call yourself a Christian.
right.
So you're saying the context of that is money.
Yeah. Jesus straight up says,
yeah.
I think speakers really have a problem with that message, because I think especially from the pulpit, they're asking you for money. So it feels like, well, of course you don't want us to give our, spend our money so we can give it to you,
Right,
So I think there's a little bit
very
of
nefarious. You just want our money.
So like, as as a prodigal son, as a skeptical person, that was kind of my thought process. Like, no, I'm not giving you my money. Like,
right.
That's how you get paid. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. But you're absolutely right. Like money is critical. I'll also point out Judas, what he did beforehand. There was a woman who put perfume on Jesus, and it apparently was worth a year's salary.
Yeah.
So like the equivalent of like 70 grand or something crazy. Imagine this woman like wasting that. And Judas saw that, and he was in charge of the money, and he was furious. And then that's when he decided, literally right after that is when he decided to go and betray Jesus. So it was over money and what Judas believed was a mismanagement of the money.
Yeah, he says that could have been sold and the money given to the poor.
Yeah.
And Jesus says you're always going to have the poor with you.
Yeah,
but I'm not going to be
really
with you
powerful comment. So again, that's a really powerful comment, because
it is.
I think part of the allure of socialism and these other ideas of saying, hey, we're going to take care of and make it all fair, is that we can prevent poverty. We can prevent this stuff. And it's like, no, you can't. And it's kind of nice to be on the other side of a lot of the challenges in the last century, because we saw what those ideologies produce.
Yeah.
And I think it's sad to see so many young people not realizing the danger of this. You can see where they're coming from, where they really want this fairness, but it really produces this horrible outcome. And Jesus told us, like, you cannot prevent poverty. It's going to happen because there's free will. And that means that people can do what they want with their money, and they can blow it all or not, and that's up to them. And the other thing I will say for practical purposes, do well with the money that you have been given, even if it's a small amount. That's what matters to Jesus. You look at the parable of the talents at the end of the gospel. He says, look, if you do poorly with the money that I give you, I'm going to take it all away from you. So he kind of does the opposite of fairness. He's actually rewarding the people who are doing well with it, investing it, and making that money into more money.
It's the exact opposite of socialism, right?
That's right.
He's
so
like,
tells us
I'm going to take the capitalist and I'm going to give him even more.
That's right.
Because he's using it and working it and, growing it.
Yeah. And I think for the other side of the coin, if you are a capitalist, you've been doing great, fantastic, you need to beware, because it can take over and become the highest thing. The best way to do that is to give it away.
Yeah.
You will show it that it is not boss of you if you can give it away. If you have a hard time with that, that's a very good litmus test that it's too important in your life.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've seen and learned and, been really just pleasantly blown away with is through Men's Alliance. I've met the most generous people I've ever known.
Yeah.
Is through MA, and seeing some people who are extremely wealthy, seeing kind of like behind the curtain into how much these people give is really mind blowing. And I think that my hunch is that most people don't really realize how generous so many wealthy Christians are.
Yeah.
They're not holding on to the money. They're not out to try to get money. They're just a conduit that God is flowing money through these people, flowing it to them because he knows that they're using it correctly. And I've heard it said before, that if you are like, if you build a dam, right, in your life with money, if money, when it flows to you, it stops flowing at you and it just starts to accumulate. God's going to, direct it elsewhere. He wants to direct it to people who it's going to flow through them and not stop when it gets to them.
Do you think it's okay for a guy to just not be that interested in making a ton of money and just like, I pay my bills, my family's taken care of, I'm not really trying to build a legacy to hand down to my kids? I don't know if is that good or bad. I think
it's healthy. Actually, I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's good. I think that's a healthy relationship, and I would encourage that. And I think many of us have fallen into the trap of the culture of trying to get rich. In 1 Timothy 6, it says, those who try to get rich fall into a temptation and a trap in many foolish and harmful desires. Those who try to get, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
Right.
And so I think that, you can pursue more money for righteous reasons, but I would even say don't even really try to do that. If you just live God's principles, then the money will actually come to you. It comes
natural.
So if you're teaching your kids how to interact with purchasing stuff, I mean, that's part of the legacy, I think, is, I mean, my kids are small, 4, 5, and 7, but they earn money for doing extra things around the house. And then when we go to the store, I'm like, okay, how much money do you have? How much does that cost? And then the beautiful thing is then we're coming home and they're trying to clean our whole house because they want to earn that extra $5 to earn this. And then as they are going through the store, they say, okay, that's $20. I really would like this other thing. I can't get both. And they're making those decisions versus need versus want. And it's really cool to see how you can train them to stop trying to feel like this one little toy is going to make them feel better. And then they're like, I already have enough toys. They're literally saying they don't want to buy toys anymore. I'm like, part of that's probably the way you're wired, but also you can train them some of this stuff earlier on so they may not fall into the same challenges that you may have fallen into without realizing it.
So wealth is just a byproduct of making good decisions with your money.
Yeah, I think that there's certainly circumstances.
Think there's a blessing aspect to it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people make good decisions. You know, it's not that they're
I mean,
thinking
like
of people in
your money.
third world countries.
Yeah.
They're not in poverty because they make bad decisions.
Yeah. That's true.
And I think of it, your question, I feel it's a little bit similar to fitness.
That was gonna.
Were you thinking that?
I was thinking the exact same thing.
And I'm like, not everybody cares about being super fit and having an incredible physique.
Right.
And I think that's fine. I don't think everybody should be striving to have an incredible physique.
Because then what happens? You're in the mirror all the time. How does this look? How does that look? You start.
And just like not everybody needs to be striving to be wealthy.
Right.
But I do think God wired some people.
Yeah.
And like this guy is all about his physique and he's all about that. And that's great. And he can go for that. And this guy's all about, building a big successful business and he can go for that. I think either one, we should not err in an extreme.
Right.
Like I would say nobody should allow themselves to get incredibly unfit.
Right.
Just like no one should allow themselves to get incredibly bad with money.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how to articulate it. I don't think we've ever had this conversation before, but I feel like you can sin in two directions with both money and fitness. Right. You can sin by making it your God.
Right.
And that's all you think about. Right. Or you can sin by being terrible with it and never taking it into consideration and being bad with money and bad with nutrition. So I feel like the healthy area is probably somewhere in between, and then realize like, hey, God's blessed some people with the ability to, crush it physically, and he's blessed some people with the ability to crush it financially.
Right. And then like if God has blessed you with that stuff, and then you don't in turn use it for him, just like any spiritual gift. It's that's right. It's like an abomination.
The question is, how can I take this thing that God has given me
and give it back to him and help others?
How can I use this talent
with any talent?
Ability?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So one of the other questions I wanted to ask you that I don't think I prepared you for at all, so we'll just see what you come up with, is kind of the opposite of my other question, is like the basic one for guys that are on it is, what would you say to the guy he's squared away with all this?
Yeah.
And he's been investing for years, putting a little bit into his funds and his accounts, and he's doing pretty well. And he maybe is listening to this thinking like, I've checked all these boxes. I'm good.
Yeah.
What's like that piece of like next level advanced 2.0 level advice that you'd give?
Yeah, it's hard to say without seeing like a specific case on what you would do, but things like getting more money and better tax treatment, converting into Roth IRAs early in retirement is really long-term tax savings is really good on that. I think for the most common thing that I see with people like that, because these are a lot of my clients actually, where they're at, is that they will not let, they need a plan to help them, encourage them to do what they believe God has for them, which generally means they're not worrying as much about money, and they're moving from success financially to making an impact and significance in the world. And they have a hard time really knowing that's going to happen until you kind of walk them through it. And so one of the best and hard things is trying to help convince people that they have enough money to then do what they feel is on God's heart. And that can happen a lot sooner than people think too. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not 60 or whatever old they think they should be. You know, some people in their 30s or younger really, you know, because when you do planning, you can say, well, you've actually saved $500,000 already. If you don't touch that, that's going to be worth this. Even if you save no more money, you might actually still be able to have a normal retirement age because you've already done so well, for instance. The other thing for people that have kind of checked all the boxes, you know, yeah, again, just specific tactics on giving, I would say. You can give appreciated stock without paying tax that's you've owned for more than a year. So plan your giving on investing in a brokerage account if you're under 70 and a half. If you're 70 and a half, you can give directly from an IRA. It's called QCD, Qualified Charitable Distribution. And so that's a way of making a distribution from your pre-tax IRA that's never been taxed before, and you can send it to Men's Alliance or your church or any nonprofit and pay no tax. That also will satisfy your required minimum distributions, which if you're older, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, that's fine. But the more sophisticated folks, strategies like that, if you have appreciated investments in a brokerage account, you can also consider giving money to grandkids or kids. I really would encourage people to do this. So again, if you're trying to teach people as a legacy how to interact with money, give them a shot. So help them to understand what a Roth IRA is. Maybe your kids are, you know, they've got some earnings, but they can't max their Roth IRA. You talk to them about that and say, hey, I'd love to max your Roth IRA. Let me give you a couple grand. If they don't know what that is, you help them understand that. You can use the fund that I just mentioned earlier, but that's a way of kind of getting them used to how an investment account goes. I think part of the challenge for people that inherit money is that, let's say you have $1 million and the stock market's crazy. It goes up 1 or 2% down all the time. And if you're not used to it, 1% of $1 million is 10 grand. That can happen in a day very easily. And so, you know, the average person that sees that will think, oh my goodness, I can't handle these types of swings. And then they want to sell everything, and they don't realize that the stock market is very consistent over a long term, just not in the short term. And so that inconsistency in the short term is something you can get used to, and it's much easier if you have less money to start doing that. And so that's why building it up over time, kind of giving your kids and grandkids a little piece of investing and helping them to understand how it is that you can build wealth over time with just a small amount of money, will give them the foundation for that success moving forward. If you're doing all of that, maybe there's a mega backdoor Roth available in your 401k. If you're self-employed, there's like a cajillion things you can do. You guys can get on my email. I'll throw a little plug there. The monthly email I do. If you email Craig.Heah, Heah, at themainstreetgroup.com, you know, he'll put you on the list and you get an email.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, because you see the emails and even this
Craig
podcast.
Heah, call sign Nuke.
Yeah. He will change his email signature to Nuke when he's emailing Men's Alliance guys, which is hilarious to me that he takes that time to do that.
He's awesome.
Yeah, he is. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I think the basics that an advisor provides for people, Vanguard has done a number of studies on this, and over multiple decades, and it shows that advisors provide about 3% per year of value, and 2% of that is helping people to not make mistakes when they're emotional around the stock market. So our nature is to sell when things are bad and to buy when things are good. And that's the opposite of what you should do. Right. So it's our nature. And so when it's not your money, it's actually a lot easier to think logically about it. And I tell people, I'm a logical guy, but it bothers me when I look at my own accounts. So you don't need to look at your accounts all the time. Know that you're in good long-term investments, and you can look at it periodically, but don't let it overwhelm you. It's a lot easier for me to look at someone else's account and tell them what to do or not do versus even myself.
Do you manage TSPs, like the thrift saving plan?
We advise on that. We're not directly in there, but clients will bring it in and we'll tell them which one to get in there. The C fund is good. That's the S&P 500 is what that is. A basic advice on investing: if you're young, don't invest in bonds. So don't invest in the G fund. Don't invest in other things that are lower return and safer. And this is what a gripe that I have with the industry is when you fill out one of these accounts, they're going to say, how risky do you want to be? And they're going to say, do you want to lose any money? And they'll say, and of course, everyone's going to no.
Don't give them that choice.
Right. And then
just go with their age.
Do you want to make money? And then they say yes. And so that you end up with a lot less risk than you should have. And even the way you say that word risk, it sounds like, oh, you got to be scared of that. And the truth is, if you are more conservative as an investor, you have way less money over the long term. It's actually a riskier move. You need to work longer. You need to save more. So it's the opposite of what people think it is. The worst return for the S&P 500 over any 30-year period, last 100 years, is 8% a year. And that was right before the Great Depression with an 85% drop in the stock market. It still recovered and returned 8% total return per year.
Wow.
The average is about 11% per year. But I'll tell you what, the ups and downs over the course of weeks or months are very hard. And that's really where that's a big piece of the job, is just helping to make sure people don't screw it up.
So don't day trade.
Don't day trade. There's some people that are pretty successful. A good example recently, Warren Buffett, there was a big drop in the stock market, about 10% total depending on which index. And he sold that day. And since then, it's almost completely recovered. So like, he's one of the best ever. And he just made a terrible mistake, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
He did the same thing in the pandemic. He was worried about the airlines, sold a bunch of his, I think it was Delta. Well, that was a terrible decision in that particular point. Now, he made some other great decisions during the financial crisis, investing in companies. But I think it'll be part of the email I'm about to do, which is, hey, even the best guys cannot do this consistently. Don't try to fool with it. 11% is just fine. Trying to get money, get rich quick is usually not a very.
I was going to say, I feel like day trading is a very dangerous game.
Yeah.
Just for mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And spiritual health, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? I think you've got to look at the motive. Why are you into day trading? Is this something that you're kind of addicted to the adrenaline hit?
Yeah. Right.
From,
This
are
kind
you
of
trying
feels
to
like gambling or whatever.
get rich quick?
Yeah.
And usually the people I've known that are super into day trading have a lot of anxiety. That's just anecdotal.
Yeah. Is that real for all?
Right.
I think it's roughly 80% dropout over 2 years. So it's a pretty low success rate of people continuing to do it even. But I would encourage people to look at the math, how much time and energy you're putting in and how much return are you getting? Yeah. And I think that a lot of times that they have play money maybe, and it's 10 or 20 grand for someone who has a lot of money, doesn't feel like a lot. But if they're spending all these hours doing it, what are you sacrificing with your family, with other things you could be doing
that time?
Or even working more and making more money than you're probably making doing that?
That's a great point.
So just keep that in mind.
So I'm gonna tell a personal story here as a plug for what you do as well. So I'm retired Air Force, 20 years military. You don't get rich doing that, and it's pretty much like open kimono. Like, everybody can go online and figure out what my retirement is. But and also you feel like that's so simple. It's so cut and dry, and it's so not much. Like, my wife and I, we're not the kind of people that need a financial advisor, right? And when we went and we met with Doc, I walked out of there feeling like I was a millionaire, right? And it was because of the way you looked at things, different from how we looked at things, and just a little bit of also just like your natural optimism, and your aggressive personality, and stuff. And we were like, much more like tight-fisted about, this is scary, going into retirement and getting out of the military and going to try to work and start up a nonprofit and all this stuff. And we walked out of your office and we were like, I wish we had done this like years ago.
Yeah.
This was the best appointment, and I think I immediately told Thor, I was like, you got to go see Doc. And he was like, I've already scheduled it.
Yeah.
It was like, but my point in saying that is, like, this is so valuable, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm a guy who, I always invested. I always put away a little bit every month out of every paycheck into a Roth IRA, into some mutual funds, into some rental properties. I thought I was doing pretty well. I read Money Magazine. I thought I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
that's like thinking you know how to fight until you get on the mat with a black belt.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I know nothing.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
I rented a karate book from the library.
And so I would just advise anybody who's kind of like thinking they're checking the right boxes, like go talk to Doc, go talk to Nuke, go talk to one of these guys, because wherever you think you are, there's probably like 100 more rungs on the ladder ahead of you, right? So this is so important.
How do you help a guy that has a car, a house, and a job? That's it. He doesn't have real estate or, all these different incomes coming in that he needs help managed.
Yeah, I mean, normally
just a one salary guy with a family.
Normally, people that are engaging with us have investments, or they think they can do that. So I think it depends on where he's at with that. But you could say, okay, if he's got a small amount that he can start investing and saving, that's really where I would say for that situation. Part of the optimism that I have is just having the experience of seeing people at many different stages of their lives. And one of the things I do with people with pensions, like you mentioned, is try to help translate what that is for someone, that doesn't have a pension. And so you can use different sort of techniques for that. 4% is a good sustainable long-term withdrawal rate that you can take from an investment. So you basically take whatever the pension amount is, you multiply it by 25, and that will give you a big number. So let's say it's 40 grand a year. So you multiply it by 25, that's $1 million. So someone would need $1 million to produce that 40 grand a year. And that helps for people to understand that they may not have $1 million, but if they're getting a pension, or even if they're older, they're getting Social Security, that could be really valuable. So I have clients that have a couple $100 grand and they're retired. They actually have the same sort of lifestyle they do now, because between their pension and Social Security, they have the same amount of money. The other optimism I would give them is, if you do own a house, which I know is harder and the interest rates are harder now for new folks, but if you own a house, paying it off gives you that raise in retirement. And that is usually, if people have less money, that's where they're at. And I think a lot of people need to rely on Social Security because they're taking, it depends on if you're self-employed or not, but they're taking a bunch of money from you and they're putting it away for the future. And, you're going to need that back if you don't have a lot of extra income. So I would say if you combine a paid off mortgage and even Social Security itself, many people actually live in that space. And again, going back to the fact that many people are not doing well, I think it's roughly 30% of 65-year-olds live on Social Security alone, and that average payment's about $1,700 a month. So I think just some perspective on whatever you're living on now versus this huge swath of people that are living on much less. If you're over 65, in many counties, if you don't have very much money, you can not pay real estate tax. So that's something that's not part of your tax return. You can kind of look it up. If you know someone who doesn't have much money, but they do own a house, you kind of have to file that usually every couple of years, but that saves people quite a bit of money not having to pay real estate tax. So that's another tactic for people that may not have as much invested that you can use as a savings tool.
Cool.
One of the things that Doc has helped us do in Men's Alliance is set up an account to where people can donate. Like, we have a support page on our website. Like, you can give monthly to Men's Alliance, but Doc's set up a thing where people can give stock to Men's Alliance, which is the kind of thing that like blows my mind. I don't know. I don't know what that is and how you give stock. I figured out how to buy a share of stock, I don't know how you give stock, but it kind of opened my eyes to like you were saying, like this is a kind of a second level tip. Right. And how you can come out better tax wise by doing it this way. And man, just stuff like that. I'm like, holy smokes, this is great. So
just a couple of things though. For you, first of all, like the fact that you made the jump to do the nonprofit and do Men's Alliance without having met me and actually encouraging you, I thought was cool. You and Thor both. So I love that story of that faithfulness, even though you didn't have as much confidence as I would have had.
We jumped and then we met you. Like, are we going to be okay?
And just another story about sort of the amount of people with Men's Alliance that, like, we started this about 14 months ago, and about 25% of my new clients have been from Men's Alliance specifically.
Wow.
And we are giving around 85 grand a year to Men's Alliance through the people that have signed up. And we're just basically giving it all away.
That's the fees.
That's right.
From the people.
Exactly.
Through Men's Alliance. Wow, that is incredible. I did not realize.
Yeah.
That.
So, I mean, again, all these folks, like, we're in this together. You know, again, God has blessed me. And I think part of the give publicly like that and to share that is because Matthew 6 tells us to do that. And whether it's giving financially or anytime that you're in your workplace, you're a regular guy, and someone's saying, man, how are you reacting to this situation? Why are you working so hard? Why are you doing this good thing that's not normal as a Christian?
Right.
That's your opportunity to not be humble and say, well, you're still going to be humble, but not push it down, but to say, you know what, actually, it's because God is real, or some variation of giving God the glory for that. Yeah. That's what we're called to do. And I think that's the best time to witness, because a lot of us are hypocrites too. So, you know, we're not always doing something where people are kind of saying, hey, this is great. But I think that's part of what God has put on my heart is listen to Matthew 6. Like, you need to do that. You need to do private giving, because otherwise maybe you're just trying to get this credit and it's not actually in your heart to give, but you should be doing both. And whether that's money or just in general, living the fruit of the Spirit and living in the world and reacting to things like someone killing themselves and calling them and apologizing, things that are ridiculous. Well, how did you do that? Well, because God is real. Like, I'm showing you. There's the evidence right there.
That's so good. Christians, we ought to be the most generous people on earth with our money for a couple reasons. One is, you know, we understand the purpose of money. And second of all, we understand that we're not living for this world. Yeah. Right. And then this is just an absolute blink in compared to eternity. So while you're here in this quick blink of a life, you know, be as generous as you can and put it into something for the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would challenge the guys who are doing really well. A lot of guys like that they're giving privately. And I think that's good. Don't get me wrong. But I think that they may be missing what God is calling them to then encourage people into Christ through the public giving.
That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Right? Do some of both. Give some stuff privately that nobody knows about, but then also give some stuff publicly to encourage others to do also.
And that's what's happened with Men's Alliance. We started a fundraising group, and I think we're going to do that in other areas. And part of that is around getting guys together who are like-minded, who can encourage each other to give more than, and again, like, as you see that, you're like, oh man, you know, our competitive juices go, and you say, oh, well, if he's giving that much, I want to give 100K. Great. I would love for someone to give more than me. That's exactly what we're hoping for. Yeah. And I think that's part of the encouragement. And around making money, you could say, okay, as long as it's in the proper place, you're not sacrificing your family and all the other things God wants you to do, make some more money so you can give more. Yeah. Like, if you need a competition, okay, let's go. Come on, let's work and see who can give the most. I'm happy to do that. And I know there's more other men that give more than I do, which is fantastic. So a lot more than I do.
Last time you were here, you said you had a goal of giving away $1 million, right?
In 1 year, in 2028. That is still active 100%. Yeah. And I just went through some of the numbers recently on the giving this year, and it's absolutely going to happen. There's no question. Yeah. And part of, I think, what I've seen God do with that is inspire other people, kind of catch their attention. Again, this glorifying God, it's like, wait, what? What are you doing? That's ridiculous. And so I think it just catches people, their attention, Christian or not. But yeah, basically, you know, I think that's what God tells us to do in Scripture. If you've been doing well financially, you should be generous. I mean, that's the antidote to the wealth that you've received. So there's goodness in it, but you know, maybe there's some things in your life are quote unquote easier, but there's also this downside. And I think that's part of what the statistics show too. It's like, I have to be careful with my kids, with buying rentals or other things. Then I can get distracted and consumed with all this money and stuff. And I think, you know, you don't want that to happen either.
For sure. I think it's always, you know, a good question to keep ourselves in check is, what do I need this money for? What am I trying to do with this? And, you know, we don't talk very much about fundraising in Men's Alliance. We have it on the website, and over the past year, we've done like 2 plugs. You know, we did like one in the winter, we did one in the summer. The one in the summer was pretty small, low key. Yeah. And then, you know, we do a big push at our January birthday dinner. And a guy told me just this past week, he was like, I think we need to actually ask more for funds. We need to like fundraise more.
Yeah.
You know, we were saying that a guy said that right in here at one of our meetings this week. And I have this hang up about that. And I'm always trying to not do it too much.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, well, I don't want to be seen as just asking for money. So it's like, and I've got to like get over myself. And I think that's been a growing point for me through doing ministry is my mind's gone back to all those times as a kid sitting in Baptist church on Sunday morning, and there's some missionary that's come in and he's there to ask for money. He's there to ask for support. And he shows you some slides of some, you know, of the work he's doing in the jungle or whatever, and some Bibles that they're translating. And these are some people they've met, and they pass around the plate. And it's kind of all clicked with me over these past, like, you know, 14-ish months in Men's Alliance of like, that's what we're doing is we're trying to reach all these men in America. And it was Swede in a conversation with him that he helped me understand this. He was like, you're confusing, Goose. He was like, you're confusing like personal humility with the ministry of Men's Alliance. And he was like, you can be humble. Dave Mills can be humble, and Dave Mills doesn't need to ask for money. But when it comes to the ministry and the organization of Men's Alliance, you need to unapologetically ask for support. Yeah. And just hearing a guy say that to me, I was like, okay, I hear him. I agree with him. He's right. I'm going to work on that. It still doesn't come natural. But just like even bringing up a second ago that people can donate stock, it was like, that's hard for me to say. Yeah. But I'm like working on it. Right. And I'm looking at this map behind you guys, and like the goal is more orange dots on that map. Right. The goal is like more fires across America, bringing more men around them. And you realize like, well, I'm just one guy and I only have so many hours per week that I can devote to this. We need more guys. Yep. We need more hours per week. We need more, you know, everything that we're doing. And that's what gets me fired up. Right. And that's where, you know, I think money comes into this. And it's such a touchy topic for anybody in ministry.
Well, right, because you're asking for money and then you get paid by Men's Alliance. Right. So again, just like the pastor, like in some ways, it's a little easier for me to ask. So I can ask people, go ahead, give money, go online. 2717 is one of those tiers.
That's right.
There's a number of different sort of perks, I guess you could say, at different levels. If you have if you're on your own small business, I would encourage you to give through the company. Not only can you get some eyeballs on your company itself, but you get to write it off on the top end of your income on your expenses versus having to itemize your deductions and give in a different way. So small businesses especially, give through your company, give stock. It's nice to give stock because it's appreciated very likely, unless you really were day trading or something silly. But you give stock and then you're not feeling it through your cash flow. So you're not having to like trick a check. Right. It's like just going from your account. And I think especially with the market, it helps you to see because you've seen it grow so much. And so you may have put in $5,000, but now you're giving 10 grand or some amount more than that. That I think it feels good to be able to, you didn't give 10 grand really, you gave $5,000. Yeah. So I think that's pretty sweet too.
Can I give Men's Alliance my cryptocurrency?
I think
do we have something like that set up?
Probably could.
Great question.
It depends on how it's titled. Cryptocurrency is interesting because
is that the future?
It's on ETFs now, so it depends on how you bought it, and you could transfer that into Schwab for sure. So is it the future? I would guess no. Part of the reason I would say that is because if you look at the history of currency, for instance, because a lot of people are frustrated with our debt, as they should be, and how much we spend, and in the currency, the problem with that is if the federal government will outlaw something if it becomes too popular, basically. So a lot of people don't know this, but in the Great Depression, they outlawed gold. It was outlawed for like 25 years or something like that. Yeah, people didn't know that.
How can you outlaw gold?
Right. The government did. So if they have a fear that Bitcoin will take over, they will just outlaw it. And other countries already have, right? So this isn't like this might happen.
They're not going to let you win.
No, they can't win. They need control of the money supply, and they'll make all sorts of arguments about why that is. We won't get into that, but the bottom line, I think, is that if it gets too popular, then it actually will not do as well. Also, if it gets more stable, that people will like that, but then it's not going to be as valuable. So if it's more stable, then it won't earn as much. It's a very risky investment.
Yeah.
So, some people have made a lot. Most of the people that ask me about it, it's when it's like too late. It's like those people that ask me usually early 2021, I think it was, still down maybe 30% from those prices roughly. So again, that was a poor time. And it's because people's nature is, hey, everyone's making money in this thing. Let me hop on the wagon. And then it ends up being a bad time. Whereas maybe 18 months ago would have been a much better time. And no one was asking me about it when it was at $17,000. So I think part of it is the nature of us have a hard time with any investment, particularly a very volatile one. For my clients specifically, they don't want to take that risk. We're talking about retirement, and they likely wouldn't be able to handle it, especially if it was 4 years and they're down 30% and the market's up a ton. They're going to be like, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
So I think that's the challenge for me as an advisor, is that I'm beholden to how the market is doing. And unless I'm doing better, then they're going to freak out.
So last closing thoughts here. What can we do as Christian men to be the best stewards of our money for the kingdom?
Fix your heart, stay with Jesus. There's no fruit that's going to come besides through him. Pray, ask God where he wants to lead you. Go through the Carry the Fire class, and we'll get you deep in that as well, and learning about apologetics and defending your faith to your family. Why does that matter for money? Again, it's a heart issue. God is after our hearts. This is just like an outside thing that happens from it. Certainly, like you said, if people want to get a review of their situation, we're happy to do that. And I think that we really encourage people, like you said, to try to look at their situation objectively. And maybe a lot of times that's optimistic, not always. I will just caution, not always, but in many cases, it's, really encouraging Christians to not let money be the reason that they're not listening to what they think God has for them to do.
There it is. Yeah.
That's it. Because
that was it for me.
Yeah. People just, they think, oh, God wants me to do this. And, oh, but I'm looking at my accounts, I can't do it. And then they stop. And it's like, man, your faithfulness is not there. And also maybe go see an advisor. They might be able to encourage you. Well, maybe you can't save as much, but you've already done this. And if we do this other thing and you make this much, then you'll be able to make it work. So you can kind of show them how much you need to make in the ministry, or what you've already been doing, and try to give them some outs. Hey, if you do this for 10 years and then you do this other thing, it'll work. So I think that type of creativity around people's finances and is powerful, but just continue to press in on what God has for you to do, regardless of the situation, and you're going to be in good shape.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah. I love that your, advice wasn't some secret stock tip, it's like,
it's pray.
Yeah. It's like, you're the real deal, man.
Just check your heart.
Yeah.
I feel like I've talked about this a little bit on the, our story, our family story about adoption. And there was like this magic God math that happened. And you look at how much you have and this thing you want to do with your money, and you're like, these numbers don't work.
Right.
But when we just took that leap and we just did it, at the end of the whole process, and it was like about a 2-year process, we had paid for the adoption and we had adopted and we still had the money.
Yeah.
And I was like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I can't figure this out on paper. Right. And then, we've seen this before too. And I would just encourage guys, if you're thinking like, man, I would love to give some to Men's Alliance, just like $27.17 a month, but we're really tight right now. I would challenge you to challenge God with that, right? Like, see what happens.
Yeah.
See what happens. Go out on this leap of faith like we did with adoption, because I bet you there's going to be magic math that happens. It's like you're going to give 27.17 and you're still going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's like, I think this is how God works. And it's like when you go on faith and you're like, you think about like movement in the military. If you're hiding behind a rock and you're like, I'm going to wait and I'll move when people show up to cover me.
Right.
Versus I'm going to take off and move and trust that I get covered. That's two different ways of thinking. And I think one of them is the way God wants us to move.
Yep.
And one of my prayers a lot is, God, cover me while I move.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm moving.
Right.
I'm going. And I'm not waiting for God to cover me.
Right.
I'm going to go and trust that he's
I'm not waiting until it makes sense for me.
That's right. So I think when it comes to finances, we've got to create that same mentality of, I know what I need to do, right? Like you were saying, people are like, oh, I've got this thing I want to do for God, but I don't feel like I'm financially there. I would just encourage them, go for it.
Yeah.
Do the thing you want to do for God.
Yeah.
And just like that missionary in the field, just pray that, hey, I need the support. God knows what you need.
Right.
So just do it. Go out on faith. Do the thing you know in your heart you need to do for God, and watch him. You kind of have to do that in order to give him the opportunity
You rob yourself. You rob yourself. I think so many people rob themselves of blessings because they don't give God the opportunity to bless them, because they think, just like, it's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than a rich man into heaven, because a rich man doesn't think they need God.
That's right.
So
Comfort is the enemy.
Yeah. So one of the things my dad told me that I'll never forget, he just told me, never, like an advice, never have money be the sole reason why you do or don't do something.
Oh,
like, if you feel like God's telling you to do it, but the money isn't there, or a job or whatever, if you feel called that God wants you to do this, do it. God will take care of you. And it's just something I've lived by, and I've seen it come true, just like Goose has, a few times in my life, where like the whole God math thing, it's like, all right, we're going to do this. God is really putting on me and my wife's heart to do whatever thing, and we don't have the money to do it. And I tell people, because I want people praying that this, that I will be taking care, because, there's power in prayer. So some people make these decisions and they don't tell anybody, and like, it's a private, financial decision. I'm going to keep quiet. It's like, you don't know, don't tell people like, oh, I hope they give me money, but just pray for me. This is what we're doing. I want you to know, like, your tribe, that's what your tribe's there for. So you can tell them these things so they can pray for you. And then you can give a testimony. Hey, you remember when I told you that? Well, this is how God worked.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the other hard part with prayer, especially, is you don't know the outcome, and it's kind of like, okay, your will be done. And even if the situation is someone doesn't give me money, but maybe he's changed my heart and now I'm not spending as much as I used to, because now my priority is on God versus buying whatever I was using on. And I would say generally, people normally have like a couple of things in these categories that they have a hard time on spending. A lot of times it's food, sometimes it's clothes, whatever it is. You can focus on those areas, and you're like, do you really want this? And so God may be revealing to you, oh, hey, we're going to put this other thing that I have for you first. And then regardless of the outcome of that, he's going to use that in other directions. So like, even with this book, like, I've seen God use all these other things that I never would have possibly imagined. I'm just trying to say yes. God tells me to do something, I'm trying to say yes. And then I'm like, I don't really want to do this. This is an awkward topic, and so kind of just continuing to say yes to God and not, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, that's good.
Man,
great stuff, awesome. Guys. Man.
Yeah.
And you're a generous guy and you give a lot, but I'll tell you one thing that you're not giving, and that's that belt right there.
You got to earn this.
Yeah, you got to come take it.
That's right. That's right. Come on.
I love that you came walking in the door today wearing the Barbarian Games championship belt.
Well, I love that you announced it today, and now we can encourage men to mark their calendars, get ready to go.
That's right.
Sign up, come compete. If you can win, fantastic.
And if you're not competing, you still got to come to the national rally.
Yeah.
It's going to be such an event that, trust me, you don't want to miss it. And we can cheer on Shadow and Doc as they
Goose, are you going to be competing?
I'm trying to decide.
He's not bringing his because we shook hands that we were going to do this together, and he's ghosted me ever since.
You're still not sure?
I'm still not sure.
You guys are doing it together.
We might.
That was the thing, but if he backs out, I'm not doing it with anybody else.
No, you're doing it. I'll find somebody else.
No.
All right. Well, you guys should both compete. Again, it's getting those memory verses and just pushing yourself in that way. Hey, if you guys can beat us, like, lose the weight. Let's go. Meat's not going to let you win. He is going to go.
It's going to be great. I can't wait to see it. And guys, Men's Alliance, I would say this: we don't need any money,
right
now,
but we want to give everybody an opportunity to be a part of this ministry with us, to join forces with us, to be a part of our reward, right? Like, we're being generous with these opportunities, and we want everybody to be in on the fires that God is spreading. And so, if you're listening to this today and stuff that Doc said, got you rethinking your finances, I would just encourage you, honestly, just support us on our mission and give God that chance to show you what he will do when you go out on faith.
Because we're not some just blind, charity that you're giving money to, hoping that it, God, so that you can actually see and know, like, okay, because, I think people get held up on church. I give it, well, what are they using that money for? I want to know where my money is going. You can actually, support an organization like this and see directly how it's impacting and where it's going. And
one of the things I really loved about, I'm on the finance committee with Men's Alliance, so I know a lot of the numbers, but is that so many men that are working for Men's Alliance don't need to get paid, which is so weird. I'm like, what are y'all doing? Like the Lord is leading these men to this mission. And then, it's really unusual to have a situation like that where you just see the God moving in a way that is I haven't seen in other nonprofits that I've been part of.
That's so cool. I'm glad you said that. We talk a lot about time, talent, and treasure. Yeah. Right. There's more than just treasure. There's giving of your time, giving of your talent. Yeah. And it's been so cool seeing this work where, where Men's Alliance is hiring almost exclusively guys who are retired and have pensions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're retired or recently getting ready to retire and you have a pension, man, come work with us. Come help us grow and spread Men's Alliance.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, Doc, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your time and your knowledge and your wisdom on helping us all do better financially.
Love it. Thank you guys.
Yeah, this was awesome.